Welcome to the inaugural event of our Cybersecurity Awareness Month here at ASU. As you guys may know, some of our audience may know, this month is a national celebration of cybersecurity awareness. We're not the only ones participating in this, but universities and frankly, institutions all across the country are working together at a national level around cybersecurity awareness. So they have lots of wonderful events. This is our kickoff. I'm Dr. Donna Kidwell. I'm the Chief Information Security and Digital Trust Officer. Hello to old friends that are joining us today that I've met before, and welcome to the new ones. I'm looking forward to getting to know you. I'm going to start us right off because we have a really wonderful guest today with Michael Palmer, who's the CISO at Hearst, formerly of the NFL. And really, without much ado, Michael, I'd love to hand it over to you. I know you're going to introduce yourself a little bit, and welcome to our community. Welcome to ASU. I'm so glad to have you kicking us off this morning.
Well, thanks for having me, Don. I'm just going to share my screen here just to kind of get started. So do you all see my screen? It says Hearst, protecting Hearst. Okay, so let me see. Okay, and then we just went to my first slide there. So again, I'm Michael Palmer. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Hearst. And what I thought I would do was just give a little bit of a background about me and my career journey, the various different companies that I've kind of worked for and where we are today. And then something I like to do, especially when I'm talking to students, is talk about, what I kind of view as, my keys to success, things that I share with the people who I mentor to kind of help them with tidbits of what happened throughout my career and, again, my kind of keys to success, right? So hopefully that's all okay with you. And then I think at the end of that, Don and I are going to have a little bit of a chat and she'll be asking me questions and hopefully I'll be able to answer them. So I'll start off a little bit again about me. You can see a little bit of my screen here as far as, some of my highlights. But what I kind of like to start off by saying, and I go all the way back to my high school days, I'm a product of a single parent. My mother came from Jamaica as an immigrant back in the late 60s. And she was basically the very inspiration of my life, right? She was my first role model. And it was something that I just seen how hard she worked throughout her years. And it's something that's kind of really been impressed on me and what I impress on my children as well. So, we grew up with very humble means. I will say that, we grew up in a very underrepresented, community, was very, we grew up poor, welfare, Section 8 housing, the whole 9 yards, went to a very bad high school. But, I always had the goal in mind of I wanted to basically escape that, socioeconomical trap, right? And the way of doing that was through education. Right, so I was very focused on making sure that I stayed out of the bad crowd in school and basically stayed in with the good crowd. I think one of the claim to fame for the high school that I went to was that we were the first school in New York City to actually end up having metal detectors. So that kind of really shows how bad of a school that I went to, but I was able to basically succeed and stay out of that, primarily because of the fact that I was always goal oriented. And I knew that I really wanted something better for my life. And I really decided the key of that again was going to school. So I applied to 3 different schools, one being Brooke College in New York, which is part of the City University of New York, NYU, and then also Lincoln College, which is a historically black community, historically black college in Pennsylvania. Didn't get any grants or any scholarships, so all I could really afford was Brooke College, and it was actually, compared to today's cost of college, very economical. I think my cost was about maybe $1,200 a year for tuition. And I decided that one of the goals was to graduate without any debt. So I actually ended up working full-time and going to school full-time. And I worked at Alexander's department store, which was a local regional department store in New York City, as a cashier. I think that was actually really one of the formative roles that I've ever had, because working in a department store, you learn the whole thing around customer satisfaction, and then also the customer's always right is a key concept. And as I started climbing up the ladder in Alexander's, I actually ended up being a budget manager at the end and also a cashiering supervisor. I actually had to work a lot with customers. And the key was to make them feel that they were happy, but also not give the store away at the same time. So I had a fiduciary responsibility to the store, but also making sure customers kept coming back to the store was also a key concept. I decided that I wanted to do something with my life that was going to generate income. And at the time, computers was something that was viewed as basically being a toy. And I didn't know if I can really make money as in the computer, field. There was no such thing as a chief information security officer back then, and a variety of these different roles that exist today just didn't exist back then. So I decided to become an accountant, and I was going to be a CPA, and that was my goal. And Baruch College was a financial college, and that really kind of suited my goals. And what I discovered after working in Alexander's and doing, I was a budget manager, and I was doing spreadsheets and forecasts and utilizing the computer to do that, and I was doing it well. I realized that I really love computers and I hated numbers. So being a CPA wasn't going to work for me. And at the same time, Alexander's actually went bankrupt, and I don't think that was due to my financial skills. It was just really basically the way how the store kind of went. So that forced me to make a move, and through a friend of mine, I landed a job at Madison Square Garden, which probably most of you know, the retail, the entertainment capital of the New York City. And it was a great job. I actually ended up becoming a computer operator there. And the role back then is that you had these reports, and the reports, these printers are very slow, and they were, had carbon paper in between the various different sheets because the reports had to be sent to multiple people. And my job was basically to separate the reports and put them in the right envelopes. Very, easy job to do. I was able to do my homework while waiting for the printouts to print out, but I was also able to attend various different events like basketball games and hockey games and all of that, by sitting in the arena. So it was a really great job. But by the time I was ready to graduate, it really wasn't what I wanted to do with my career. I should also mention the person who hired me at Alexander's was my now current wife, right? So that was 26 years ago, and our anniversary is actually tomorrow. So we'll be married for 26 years ago. So that really wouldn't work in today's, I guess, political correctness environment. What was also interesting is, of course, we weren't dating at the time. That was the first time I actually met her at Madison Square Garden. But she went to a company called GHI, which is now called Emblem Health, which is a major health insurance company, and it still exists today. And she recruited me. She brought me over to Emblem Health, and my job there was a network manager. So I managed the network of computers and time clocks and payroll. So it was a pretty good job. But we started to get a little bit serious, and I decided I really couldn't work for her anymore. So I actually stayed within the same company and transferred to the computer department. So when I initially came in, I was in the HR department, of all things. So I ended up becoming the distributed support group manager at GHI, which was a good job. And actually, shortly after I got that transfer, the manager of the department basically left. And they asked me to take on the acting role of being manager, which I did for about a year and did a really good job with that, but unfortunately, they just didn't really want to give me the title. And also, they didn't want to give me the salary. And knowing the company, the management kind of saw my wife and me, and they knew that we were in a relationship, and they counted our salaries together. So I knew that that wasn't a company that I could stay no longer. And interestingly enough, my last day there was the day before we got married. So and we got married on a Saturday. My last day was on a Friday. I took a 2-week vacation. And then I started off at a new company called Ascom Timeplex, who hired me as a network engineer, but on the sales side. And because I had a very calm demeanor, and the fact of also I had good customer relationship skills, they wanted me to be in a role of a senior support engineer. And basically my job was to go into customer environments that were very angry and upset, most likely because they've been down systemically for several times, but they were ready to throw them out of the organization. So my role was to go in, smooth over the relationship, work with the back end, support teams, fix whatever the problems were, and then be their person moving forward to maintain that relationship. So that was a good role, but then what ended up happening was that that company ended up deciding that they were no longer going to be in the network business and they're going to go back in the telecom business, which I viewed was a mistake. And it was no longer aligned with my career path. So I decided to then move on to Dreyfus, which is the mutual fund company, now owned by Bank of New York. and I became the network manager there. And again, I was very technical, hands on keyboards, programming routers and switches, and at that time bridges, and did a really good job for them. They wanted me. At that time I was married and I was living in New York, and we were living in this suburb in Long Island, and Dreyfus was about maybe 10 minutes away from my office. They decided that they wanted me to move to New York and fix a project there. There was a network floor, a trading floor, as you know, where if you see traders that are trading on Wall Street, Dreyfus has the same kind of a trading system, very high pressure environment. Whenever the market would peak, their network would go down. And I found that there was a lot of things wrong with the network. I was able to fix it and get them operational again. They decided that they wanted me to stay there, but they didn't want to pay me the right amount of money for being in New York. So I kind of saw that I really wasn't valued there, and I basically left after about a year, and I went to the National Football League. So up until that point, I was working in these companies for maybe 1 year or 2 years. At the NFL, I actually ended up staying there for about maybe 25 years, 22 years to be exact. So I was at the NFL for a very long time. I started off as a network manager, again, very technical, hands-on keyboards. After about maybe 8 or 12 years, and also at this time too, right when I entered the NFL, my first daughter was born, or my daughter was born. And one of the goals that I set was that I was going to pay for her college education, unlike what happened with me, and make sure that my kids go to school. So that was also another goal that I had set. And I'm happy to say now that my daughter is graduated from MIT a couple of years ago. With a degree in mechanical engineering. She's now she got her master's from Stanford a couple of months ago, and now she's on track to get her doctorate in artificial intelligence and robotics. So she's at Stanford right now. My son was born a couple of years later, and he is a senior at Rochester Institute of Technology doing computer science. So, both kids are doing really well. And I was really focused on family in my initial years versus work, right? So I kind of say that I was employed by the NFL, but I worked for my family, right? So that was also very key to me. And, once I was able to get the network and everything else kind of solidified at the NFL, I ended up becoming a director and inheriting a lot of shared services groups. So then I became basically a director of managing teams. And at the time I left that network position at the NFL, which was about 2012, I was running networking, I was running emails, voice over IP, which is the telephone system, and then also Wi-Fi and firewalls. At the time, I felt that I needed a new challenge. I was doing networking for a long time. I was also running part of the security infrastructure, and I knew that security wasn't viewed holistically. So I made a business proposition to my manager who just came in, we got a new CIO, that I really wanted to start a security program at the NFL. She wanted to combine networking and server infrastructure together, so it was kind of advantageous to her. So I agreed to give up my staff, start with nothing, and then take a small budget for consulting and build a security program. The only thing that she asked me to do was to get certified. So I went out and got my certifications in CISSP, CISM, did those relatively quickly because I had a lot of experience already on the networking, and networking is a really core technology and topic. And then ended up getting my certifications. I had a friend that worked at Target. This was before their breach, and he was the senior director of network infrastructure. And at that time, security reported to them. And he gave me an opportunity of going out to Minneapolis and learning all about security from them. I also had another couple of friends that were CIOs that had security reporting to them. So I also got to talk to a lot of other CISOs, and I got to get my information and background by networking with all of these various folks on how security worked in other organizations. And based upon how I knew how the NFL was formed and structured, I was able to build a security program at the NFL. So that was in 2012. Fast forward to 2019, before I left, we had probably the best cybersecurity program in professional sports because of all of the work in regards to building a risk program, getting ownership involvement and engaged, working with the various teams and the businesses. One of my core strengths that I have on the sheet here is that I collaborate. So I was able to, show how important security were to all of the business initiatives. As an example, one of the things that we founded our program was on PCI, which is the payment card industry rules. So if you process credit cards anywhere in the world, you have to be PCI compliant, which is a rigid list of a variety of different things about securing your environment. The NFL at that time wasn't PCI compliant. And if you know how the NFL makes money, right, and you're probably all aware of this, a quarter of their revenue stream comes from sponsorships. This is like Nike saying that they're the official sneaker of the NFL, or Subway saying that they're the official sandwich of the NFL. Those companies pay the NFL a lot of money to have that naming right so that they can do those commercials. Visa is also a sponsor of the NFL, probably one of the oldest sponsors, and Visa is also a founding member of the PCI Council for credit cards. So what I went back to management and indicated was, it'd be a very brand reputational problem if the NFL ever had a credit card breach. Not only will our fans be upset with us, but our sponsors will also realize that we're not following their rules. And that's going to jeopardize our revenue stream from that. And that's millions of dollars worth of revenue loss. So they saw the value in cybersecurity. And this was before the major breaches like Sony and Target happened. So we ended up building our cybersecurity program. And by the time those breaches did happen, we had a very well-defined program in place to prevent advanced persistent threats. And these programs were also extended to major events like Super Bowl and Pro Bowl and draft and all of the other issues. I ended up working a lot with states and local governments because they are the ones who own the stadiums in a lot of cases. So when you talk about Super Bowl, which is a national special security event, I'm working with DHS and Homeland Security and the Secret Service and a bunch of other government agencies on protecting the event and protecting them from a cyber standpoint, especially as cyber started to become more and more important. So the role of the CISO ended up becoming a lot of a key management role within the NFL. So again, back to 2019, I kind of decided that, I was doing Super Bowl for many years. I was doing cybersecurity for many years. And again, I needed a different change. I needed a new challenge because I was able to do a lot of those things on a repetitive basis, and it just really wasn't challenging for me anymore. So I decided to move on to Hearst. And I will advance the slide here. So Hearst is an interesting organization. It's $11 billion in revenue. It's one of the largest privately owned companies, in the world. 24,000 employees, 360 businesses, 40 different languages in over 150 countries. And you'll see that Hearst is divided up into various different business groups. We have hundreds of magazines. We have about 30 or so different television stations across the country. 30 or so different newspapers, which is where, William Randolph Hearst got his initial start with the San Francisco Examiner. And then we also own some, interest in other companies. Like, for example, we own half of A&E, History and Lifetime channels, 20% of ESPN. But then we also have some other business groups like Hearst Health, and we have a variety of different healthcare businesses there. So if you think about it, and a lot of these businesses you're probably using today and you didn't even realize it. So let's say, for example, you're going to a pharmacy and you're getting a prescription refilled, and the pharmacist is looking into the database to see if there's any interactions with the drug that you're being filled with versus what you have in your past. That's actually our database from a company called FDB that they're utilizing. So we're servicing 90% of the world's pharmacies and hospitals. We have another company that does electronic medical records for home health aid attendants. So if you have elderly parents and you have nurses visiting your home, they're most likely utilizing our electronic medical record system. So we have a lot of those businesses that people aren't really aware of, but yet we're processing lots of information, processing lots of credit cards, processing lots of healthcare information. And these are the things that we just have to be aware of. So my role at Hearst is to provide strategy and leadership around security, making sure that all of our businesses are aligned with security, managing our risk appropriately, and ensuring that we have all of the right procedures, processes in place to prevent any kind of a cybersecurity breach. especially with the information that we're processing. So I talked a little bit about Hearst Health, right? So we're working with companies like Cigna and who are some of the other major healthcare providers, Aetna, lots of others, and managing a lot of the grievance and plans and other things of that nature for them. So, we're that supply chain for them. So again, it's very important that we're protecting all of this information because we're processing healthcare records for millions of people. We have companies like Black Book and Motor and Camp. Camp is an interesting company. They actually process the maintenance records for most of the major airlines and private transportation companies. So again, things that you don't see in the background, but have a daily impact into your normal lives. Of course, we have Hearst magazines. So some major brands there from Car and Driver to Oprah, right? And we're processing all of the subscriptions for people that are renewing. So we have a lot of PII, or personal identifiable information. We're a tier 1 PCI merchant, which means that we're processing millions of PCI credit card transactions a day with people renewing for magazines and subscriptions and digital items. So we have a lot of data, right? And that's very key to our business model. So protection of that data is important. And that's really my role for the organization, is ensuring that we have all of those things, kind of protected, right? So I work with many of these business units, actually all of these business units across the board, in ensuring that we have the right cybersecurity strategy. We're providing out security awareness, and that's a big part of this month, right? It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we're doing a large campaign of training for our 24,000 employees, as well as consultants that work with us. So it's a lot of programs that we put in place around that. Renewing cybersecurity certifications for PCI and HIPAA and high tech is something also that my group is working on, and then also doing investigations for when we think we have challenges. People are, we have cybersecurity criminals that are trying to penetrate into our environment all the time. So we have to make sure that we're defending those borders, and that's an ever evolving job. So what I'd like to kind of go into now is just talk a little bit about that model that I mentioned, right? And you see the screen as a blank slate, right? Because your life starts off as a blank slate, is kind of the way how I put it. But in reality, it's all about you. You're the master or mistress of your own destiny, right? And you take and you make risks, you take opportunities, and it's up to you to manage your particular life. And I have this 4B principle, right? Of, the ultimate goal in life to me is to be happy, right? And in order to be happy, I feel that you have to be challenged. And you've heard me say that word before about challenge, right? So going into work every day, feeling that you're providing some sort of, or getting some sort of excitement out of life, right? You don't want to go to work and be bored, or go to school to be bored, right? The other thing is that you want to be valued, right? So that's a two-way street. One, the company's paying you what you think that you should be getting compensated for. And then two, you're providing value back to them, and that they, you hear this word about diversity, equity, inclusion. And inclusion to me is the most important thing, meaning that what you say and what you do matters to the organization. And your input is being taken and being sought and is valued. So to me, that's very important. And then in order to be valued and intentional, I think that, valued and challenged, you have to be intentional. You have to manage that. You have to push that. No one's going to push that for you, right? So I have a couple of things that I kind of work on or say is that, you have to develop a skill. So whether it's cybersecurity, accounting, finance, you have to be the best at what you want to be. My screen is a little blocked by some of the Zoom stuff, and you have to figure out how to solve problems, right? In a lot of cases, you have to have interpersonal skills because you can't work alone. Even in this virtual world, you have to work with teams, and companies are looking for that kind of the teamwork kind of approach. So you have to develop problem-solving skills and interpersonal relationship skills, and you need to figure out how to do that. And the way how I look at doing it is, I read a lot, right? So there are a variety of different books that I kind of recommend, and I don't have time to go into each of these, but these are books that have really helped me within my life. I'll talk about a couple of them. Empowering Yourself talks about some of the rules to the game. This author refers to life in corporate America as a game, right? And if you want to be successful, you have to understand how to play and how to manipulate that game. You have to understand the rules, and in a lot of cases, the rules are unwritten. So this book kind of provides a good, viewpoint into that. And it's a lot of common sense things that you kind of find out that he kind of documented, which I just found helpful. And he talks about, and I'll talk about a little bit later about mentor and sponsorship and how you succeed in life. Brag, the art of tooting your own horn without blowing it, is about branding. Okay, I think that a lot of us grew up in the same way of, your parents say you shouldn't really talk about yourself. Let other people talk about it for you. That's a mistake, right? Because who knows you better than yourself? And if you really want people to understand your value, you have to brand yourself like a company brands itself with a marketing campaign. So there are certain things to do in life. For example, when you're going on an interview and the interviewer asks you to tell you a little bit about yourself, they have their resume, they have your resume in front of you. They're not asking you to recount every line item that's on your resume. They want to understand your story. They want to understand the items that happen in between the job, how you made a project successful. They want to hear your spin on that, right? So it's all about how you present yourself. And this book goes into a way of building a story about yourself that's very intriguing to other people. And it helps with advertising you. I say, and I tell people, your brand is about what people say about you when you're not in the room. And the way you want people to say what about you when you're not in the room, you have to control that by subliminally giving them ideas and aspects about yourself. And you have to plant the seeds to that story. How to Read a Person Like a Book is a great book. It talks about the fact that people aren't always honest in what they say, but what they are doing as far as their body language is very important and will help you understand if they are adopting to what you're trying to deliver, or if they're resistant to what you're trying to deliver. And it goes into a lot of the stories to kind of help with tell that. So it's a great book about nonverbal communication that really helps you, especially if you're doing presentations or if you're doing negotiations. It's great. Never Eat Alone is a fantastic book. It's about building relationships. And the one thing that I remember an HR professional tell me is the number one killer of people with promotions is when the people who are deciding the promotions don't know who you are, right? And that's because you haven't done a good job with building relationships. You've heard me say that I was able to, go to Target, right? And also talk to other CISOs. That was all through building networks and building relationships. And this book actually talks about the fact of you have about 7 or 8 opportunities a day to build new relationships. That's breakfast, lunch, dinner, coffee breaks, smoking breaks. Never do that by yourself, right? Never eat alone. Always go out and promote yourself. Drop to people the golden nuggets of what you want to do in life so that they also get to know you. So this way, if an opportunity comes up and they know about you, they may be able to help you with bridging that. I think they say today that most people get their jobs through relationships about who they know versus what they know. So a really great book. I always think about medium and long-term planning, having that career development plan of what you want to do. What are your long-term goals and what are the things you need to do in order to get there? It's really good to document those things down because that'll help keep yourself accountable and then look back at it every once in a while and see if you're making it towards your plan. I also talk about financial flexibility here too. Planning also. So like when I mentioned the fact that, I was going to pay for my kids' college, I started a 529 plan, 25 years ago, and started adding to that on a regular basis. Same thing with, retirement. I was reading an article and it said that if you're at the age 21 and you max out your 401k every year from 21, by the time you hit 60, you'll have $2 million for retirement, right? So because of all the compound interest and the matching salaries that your company puts in, these are things that people don't think about, in the short term, that's going to have an impact in the long term. So documenting and creating those career life kind of decisions and do it both on a personal and professional standpoint will help keep you accountable and help make sure that you are growing. Self-development, I talk about mentors and sponsors. A mentor is a person that's going to help you with learning, helping you with doing certain tasks, someone who's a little bit more experienced than you. A sponsor is someone who is going to put their name on the line for you. For example, recommend you for promotion. And in a lot of cases, like at my level where I am at now, I get promoted based upon building high performance teams. So I'm only going to put people on my team that I know are going to be high performers, because if I don't, it's going to detract my ability to get my next role. So I want to make sure, and usually it's by mentoring people, I get to understand, and also by their branding, understand that if they're going to be one of those high performance individuals that I want to recommend to someone else, right? So there's a path for sponsorship, but you have to be mentored first, and then take risks and failures in your career, right? You have to keep yourself accountable. I say that, you're going to fail, and that's failing is good, because when you fail, you learn, and then you won't fail again at the same particular task. So you just have to keep remembering to keep doing that and taking risks, take calculated risks, especially when you're young, because eventually that'll kind of pay off. Self-management, get to know yourself, right? Again, you need to really understand your own limitations and capabilities and keep trying to push yourself. But it only happens if you know what your weaknesses are. So it's really good to do that. Friends and family are also very important, but also you also have to realize that friends and family can also bring you down, right? So you have to manage those relationships. And in a lot of cases, people's friends aren't really their friends, right? So I view a friend as someone who wants to help you succeed and elevate you. You have those people in your life that are so-called friends that pull you down, right? So you have to be able to make that determination, again, through knowing yourself, knowing them, and then making the decision is, are they really adding value to your life? Are they going to help you be successful? Sometimes you have to make those hard, tough decisions. Physical and mental health is extremely important, especially as you get to climb the ladder and you're experiencing a lot of stress and pressures. You have to have hobbies and interests to kind of get you to the next stage of managing your own mental, physical health and well-being, because nothing is going to be worse than if you stress yourself out to the point where you have a heart attack and you're no longer around, right? So again, that's really important, and that can never be understated. So I know I kind of went pretty quickly there. And the last thing I have there is own your own brand, right? Which is, again, about making sure that you're promoting yourself, right? And showing what your value is, because that's going to be extremely important in helping you with succeeding and getting people to understand what value you can provide to a project that they're working on. So these are kind of my points in life. I think everyone's mileage may vary. So again, this is what's really helped me. And you've heard me talk about, my kind of career path. So, I'll say that, I, needed to be challenged. I left Madison Square Garden because I needed to be challenged. I left GHI, Emblem Health, because I wasn't valued. I left Ascom Timeplex because, again, I wasn't challenged. I left Dreyfus because I wasn't valued. I left the NFL because I wasn't challenged. And now I'm feeling challenged at Hearst. So again, this is how I've managed my life, and how I think that it's been very impactful for me. And I've experienced an extreme amount of success, going from someone that was, on welfare to where I am today. And I just wanted to share this with you, and hopefully you understand. And I think this is the end of my presentation.
Michael, this is incredible. Thank you so much. And what an inspiring story. I don't know which part of it I like the most. I mean, I love the fact that you didn't start in IT, and that there were formative lessons that really came from your very first experiences around how to build relationships. That's beautiful. I love the fact that you've been married for 26 years and you're so proud of your kids. That's really cool.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Well, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, right? That's who I work for, right? And it's really all about my family. And that's been really my core focus of making sure that they're happy and they're successful. I'll say that, both of my kids have special needs, right? So, there were times when, for example, my wife, ended up leaving her job and focusing on the kids, and then once the kids were in a good place, she went back and she got her MBA, and, now she's doing other things too. So, it's all about, to me, family and managing that, and making sure that they're all successful. Plus, I need someone to take care of me in my old age.
I totally hear that. Yeah, I want to drill in a little bit on so many things. And I see a couple questions in our chats too. So I'm going to ask a few questions. Dr. Timothy Summers, I see you put one in. If some other folks want to ask questions, go ahead and do so. And I might kick us off a little bit. I'm really interested, and while you were talking, I was kind of looking at who we have in attendance. We've got a lot of students. We have a lot of technology professionals from across the campus. We have a few guests in our audience. And I kind of want to ask you around this question of mentoring and the theme and thread that runs through your life of being able to establish these relationships. Are there programs that you've seen or programs that you've worked with or built that you felt were really effective? Because it's not always easy to find a mentor. It can feel a little awkward. Just curious what kinds of models you've seen that really work, or programs you've built, or techniques you might have.
Yeah, so actually, this is actually a pretty interesting, one and question, right? So one of the groups that I'm very passionate, and I had it on my front slide there, that I'm a member of, is a group called the ITSMF, and it's called the IT Senior Management Forum. So they were founded about 25, 30 years ago, and their mission is to help create a pipeline for African Americans to be senior leaders, CXOs, officers within Fortune 500 companies. And they do that through mentorship and sponsorship, right? So they have mentorship programs, and I've used them for a lot of different advice. And now I give back to them. And I'll tell this story, right, because this was actually very impactful. And also there's the linkage here to ASU in regard to this. When I was in a session, they were talking about, you need to have a mentor and you have a sponsor in every, company. And what you should do is to, write a note to a senior level executive within inside of your organization, tell them about how, you really wanted to, that they inspire you, that you really want to learn a little bit more about their career path, and the decisions that they made, when they took a left turn or a right turn in their career path, and get to know them a little bit better, because you can get to learn from them. So I did this, and I sent this to a senior level executive within inside of the NFL at the time, who actually is the athletic director for ASU, which is Ray Anderson, right? So Ray Anderson was an executive vice president in charge of all of football, and he was very receptive to my note. And, he reached out to me and said that he wanted to meet with me right away. And we had a really great session, and we started talking about, life and where we want to go. And Ray started to recommend me for programs at the NFL, and some new ones that they were talking about at the senior management level for directors. And one of them was called the NFL Lead Program. And he introduced me into that, talked to my manager, got me enrolled into the program. And that, to me, really was a game changer for me in my career path at the NFL. Because at that point, I was a director, I think, for 8 years. And 2 years after going into that program and also joining the ITSMF, I got 2 promotions within 2 years, right? Went from director to senior director, and then director to VP. So there are programs like that, there are programs like Europe that target underrepresented youths. And I'm very passionate about that. I'm the executive sponsor for Europe at the Hearst. I also help bring them in at the NFL, whereby you bring in students for about 6 months. It's a paid program for them, and they end up, getting lifetime. And I think we hired 50% of them last year at Hearst. So there's Piscolas, there's a bunch of others too that are really impactful. And in a lot of cases, when you get to be senior in your career, it's about giving back too, right? So I give back, and I mentor through a bunch of these programs and others.
That's phenomenal. I know the Europe folks have a couple different institutions, community colleges, I think they work with here in the Phoenix Valley. And I love the story about Ray. I was hoping that we might be able to get him to do a surprise introduction, but apparently we're playing Stanford. Just pull that all back around. If your daughter wants to watch the game, let us know. Okay. Friday afternoon.
I'd have to have a conflict about who I root for then at that particular point in time.
Well, if you're in our box, Rain might not see you if you like secretly rooted for your daughter's team. Hey, Timothy, I see you here. Do you want to ask your question since your Zoom is right below mine? I can't resist.
Sure, no, definitely. And Michael, thank you so much for the time and sharing your background. Fellow New Yorker here, grew up in the Bronx. Really appreciate you sharing your story. I was thinking about, just the ways that, of course, someone with your background like inspires others. And we have many students and folks thinking about cybersecurity, of course, Cybersecurity Month. Wondering any pieces of wisdom or lessons learned that you can share about being a CISO in today's environment. Incredibly challenging time, robust, all kinds of things are happening. And just love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I'd say the most important thing for me being a CISO is building relationships, right? Building relationships with the various different business units, the business leaders, senior management, the technology teams. That's extremely important. The other thing I would say is really trying to understand and be a good storyteller, right? Because you have to tell stories about cybersecurity to all different levels, from the technician up to the CEO. So different pieces of information resonate with different people. So basically being able to tell the right kind of a story to what's going to resonate to the CEO. The CEO is going to really care about expansion of the company, revenue growth. A technician is going to be really concerned about, let's say, keeping the latest software built on the right device. So being able to make those transitions and tell the right stories are extremely important.
Couldn't agree more, and really glad that you use the word storytelling. I know the folks on my team hear me use that a lot. I think many times we don't think about the role that things like that play in cybersecurity. So really appreciate you sharing there. And if I could squeeze in one more, maybe perhaps if you could, share kind of what you see on the landscape kind of going into the future. We're a very forward-thinking organization. ASU is, we pride ourselves on being that way. Kind of what do you see coming down the line?
Sorry, Timothy, can you hold on a second? I have someone at my door.
Sure, no worries. So Donna, this was a really great talk so far. I've been really enjoying the discussion.
Yeah, and we're going to roll right after this into a 30 minutes discussion that I'll lead, really talking about where we are in cybersecurity and kind of what's happening with it. So we've got a few minutes before Michael comes back, and then he's got a board meeting, so we'll lose him right at the top of the hour if other folks have questions.
I'm sorry about that.
No, don't be at all. It's the real world that we've learned to live in post-pandemic when we're in these modalities.
Yeah.
Timothy was asking you about what you see in the future.
I see the amount of attacks raising, right? Because the challenge that we have is there's not a lot of retribution against these bad actors. They have a lot of anonymity. They're very difficult to track down. And what they're doing is generating large amounts of revenue and money for them. So they're pretty much incentivized to keep on going. And unless there's a fundamental shift in law enforcement and cooperation with governments across the world, I don't see that kind of slowing down. So we just see cyber attacks are going to continue to increase, which is really going to make businesses and, let's say, the critical infrastructure of the government raise their game on cybersecurity. And that's kind of where I kind of see it going. So if you're looking for a good career field that you're sure of not, let's say, dissipating over the next 10 years, I think cybersecurity is a very good field for you to really consider going into. And there's a variety of different roles that basically appeal to anyone of any different type of backgrounds, kind of skill set.
Michael, I'd love to hear you talk more about that, because I think your own experience is a really great example of that. And the two companies that you've talked about a lot today, Hearst and NFL, aren't necessarily the ones that you would think of, hey, I've got a cybersecurity career, I'm going to go into the NFL. You might, your first thought might be a technology company. So I'm really curious what kinds of, what do you see changing in the nature of these cyber roles? And as you pointed out, the CISO role is really pretty young. It's only been around, 25 years or so. So I'm curious, what are the entry points and where does security become relevant no matter what your track might be?
So I think security or cybersecurity is relevant for every single organization because, there's a saying that's been really adopted lately is that every business is a technology business, today, because you're seeing the rapid growth of digital transformation. We're seeing a lot of businesses that are going to the cloud. Everything is, transforming. I remember, kind of as an example of thinking, with the roads, you used to have all these toll booths, and you had the people that were collecting money and making change, and you kind of thought that those people had a guaranteed job for life. Now things like Easy Pass and SunPass has come into play, and all that's been digitized now, and those roles have been eliminated. But it's created a lot of new roles for people that they just have to be really trained up for, right? So I think that technology is going to be increasing dramatically over the next let's say 5-10 years. And with that being said, security is a natural integration of that. And security needs to be really thought of as part of the design or the implementation of those new technologies versus an add-on or bolt-on at the end, right? And there's a lot of different career paths, right? So there are people that are good with people that can communicate, and they want to be, let's say, trainers or governance, risk, and compliance people, and then you also have people that are really good with numbers or with screens or with, other type of technology, and maybe not be as good with people. So they might want to be behind the scenes. So there's roles for a variety of different people with a variety of different skill types. I would also say too, is that our adversaries, from a cybersecurity perspective, come from a wide variety of different backgrounds, right? So you have women, you have men, you have African Americans, you have Asians, you have Islander Pacificers, LGBTQ, all of these different mindsets allow for people to think differently in how they attack. And in order to defend against all those different types of vectors, you need to have people that understand, how the bad actors are thinking, how they're communicating. So therefore, you really need to have that diverse community, and it's not, again, about whether you're a woman or a man or, African American or Caucasian. It's really about how those different types of people think. So it's really about diversity of thought versus diversity of gender, ethnicity, or creed. And, I think that that's something that is starting to come to the forefront. And I think is going to be more valuable moving forward more than others. Anything else?
I love that. I've got a question about Hearst because it's such a diverse organization. It strikes me that the audience here may not have been familiar with all the different things that Hearst does, everything from healthcare into media. And, I'm curious, do you find that as CISO, that mix is that a lot of complication? I mean, you touched on HIPAA data and PCI data, and it's a really complex set of things that an organization like that hits. Is there anything in particular that you find, as opposed to maybe prior experiences that you had, that's really unique because of how Hearst is composed?
Well, the thing that I really loved about Hearst and what really intrigued me into the role was how much management here was forward thinking in regards to data and the importance of data to the business moving forward. And you'll actually even see, if you look at, Steve Schwartz's annual letter, he'll talk a lot about technology, and he'll talk a lot about data, and he'll call for research and development around automation and artificial intelligence as, future aspects. So they really see data as part of the key of the business model moving forward. And with that being said, he realized how important it is that security is in the development of that. And, that was one of the reasons why they elevated the role to be a senior leader for Hearst be in security and be at the table as we're making all of these key important decisions. And that to me is what really resonated as far as how Hearst thinks about technology, data privacy. Hearst is a very, when I describe the culture of Hearst, I define it as a people-oriented culture. They really put people first. The way how they handled the pandemic and making sure that all of our employees were safe and sound was, I think, really impressive versus what I've seen with a lot of other organizations. So the security of people's information is also very important to them. And, that's really, to me, just really part of the culture of what a great company Hearst is.
Yeah, that's really incredible. President Crow talks a lot about how culture is the most important thing in Trump's strategy in so many different ways. But trying to actually live that in principle can be where the challenge really becomes. So that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah, I like that saying, actually, that culture strategy for breakfast.
I've got a similar kind of question as to maybe some of the uniqueness of the NFL. And I'd love to hear more about what are the kinds of considerations that you have when you're thinking about the Super Bowl in a town and the kinds of things that a city is going to have to contribute to. That's a whole different set of actors. I'm just curious to understand, do you have to plan that years in advance when you know that's going to happen? How do you build those relationships? Like, how does the magic happen for something that's so big and so complex?
Yeah, it is pretty much planned years in advance. And, I would probably say that they're usually on a 3 to 4 year cycle in advance planning for this various different. As soon as the stadiums, because, the cities are named many years in advance. And once they're named is when the planning begins. And, fortunately, we get a lot of help as being designated as a national security special event. So I think that we're at that level that's just right below the presidential election, but yet is very significant in the amount of resources that we get. And to me, one of the planning efforts that we really do is just getting together with a lot of the stakeholders, because there's a variety of different local agencies and states, and you can be in a state, like, for example, I think Minnesota, we were in 5 different counties. So there's 5 different county governments. You then have the state government, then you have the federal government. They all have their own portions, but then you also have a lot of properties, right? So there's various different hotels that we utilize, and we're utilizing their infrastructure. Then there's also a variety of different communication providers. So we're working very closely with Verizon and Comcast and Level 3 and all of those, and then also some private businesses. So one of the things that we do is we get together and we form basically a committee or a session, and we do a lot of planning. So we actually do a tabletop exercise for Super Bowl, and we bring in, or I should say they, because it's all past tense now, right? But I was pretty much the one that started it. We did a lot of tabletop exercises. So we did an incident response exercise, and we brought in all of the stakeholders across federal, state, local governments. And in my last one, in Super Bowl 53, we also brought in a variety of different CISOs from the city of Atlanta. So, we had, if Jamil from Equifax, and, we had Deborah from Delta Airlines, and, we had some of the CISOs, I think Tim Callahan from Aflac was there. I think we had like maybe 30 or so different CISOs who all have great threat intelligence programs. So we were able to bring that together and utilize the capabilities around DHS's NCIC, which is the National Cybersecurity Integration Center, which is basically DHS's help desk. So we kind of funneled an incident response process utilizing that, bringing in classified and unclassified information from the federal government to really look at threats in a new way.
That's extraordinary, but what a great example of collaboration and community being so core to cybersecurity success. That's a really beautiful example.
Yes, thanks.
One of the things that you said that I think is going to stick with me is that you have to plant the seeds of your own story. And I really liked that. And I thought we might close out a little bit, and I might ask you, You were it strikes me as rather brave at these points where you recognized that the challenge was going to be elsewhere. And so I'm curious for this audience, do you have any advice or thoughts as we close out around how they might really advocate for themselves, or how do they find allies like you found in Ray? What are the kinds of things that they could actually do today? Because it's not uncommon, I think, throughout our careers to realize that the value proposition between how you perceive yourself and your contribution and your employers may not be exactly what you thought. So I'd love to hear if you have any closing thoughts on how these our colleagues here might navigate that.
So I would say it's really about being true to yourself and your values, and don't compromise on your values. And then also build that network of people that's going to be your support mechanism, right? So you probably have people that have been very important in your life. I love this concept of what we kind of call a board of directors. And I think it was in the presentation, I didn't go into it that much, whereby you leverage a community of people, just like how a company has a board of directors of senior management of experts that helps guide them. You can build that same board in your life. So whether that's a spouse, clergy, someone who is senior to you at work or below you, building that board of trusted advisors that can provide you with the guidance, right? So you're your own CEO, going back to the you concept, right, of making your own decision, but you could get feedback and guidance from a variety of different people to help inform your decision, right? So maintaining and getting that collaboration and that input, could be really helpful for you when you're making decisions, so that you're not making them in a vacuum, and you're making the most informed decision about your life.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is fantastic.
And remember, network and make connections.
Michael, do you mind if we share your deck? Because I see in a few questions about books or questions about your background.
Yes.
Do you mind if we share it with our colleagues here? That'd be lovely. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, for helping us kick off our cybersecurity awareness. Thanks everybody, and all the great comments that we have here in the chat. Michael, I really both appreciate your wisdom and just how open you've been around your own journey and your thoughts for how our colleagues might approach theirs. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone stay cyber safe.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, good morning, everybody. As we transition to the next part of our conversation today, that was really inspiring. One of the things that when I first met Michael, I really reflected on was just how much he's really serious about building communities for the different organizations that he tries to protect, and just such a great role model in that as an example. I wanted to start by just reflecting on, and I think we heard threads of this as Michael was talking to us about his own career. In a lot of ways, the situation with cybersecurity is really shifting. Now, this isn't a shift that's brand new. Most shifts aren't. 3 or 4 years ago, conversations on this campus and others started around zero trust. These are all things that I think we're recognizing in different ways. We're seeing different signals about what the shift is. But I really rather like this metaphor for the shift. If you think of the early days, as Michael described his careers of network switches and environments that you would protect, you really could protect the perimeter and protect your network with firewalls and rather traditional methodologies. And as we go more and more to the cloud, as our environments start becoming more and more diverse, as you have something like a pandemic that sends a workforce home, and then large societal trends where working remote is happening in lots of different ways, that really does shift foundationally our security posture, and then how we think about how we'll actually protect things. And it's kind of a lovely way of trying to figure out then how do you navigate that inside of your own career. Like, what is it that you know today? And how would you be able to shift that or be agile in terms of matching that to what's happening and what we really do need? And security is found in all sorts of crazy places. I maybe start just with the kinds of data that we're protecting. So let's say we're not going to be able to put a moat around the castle, and no one's going to be able to get at the data because it's heavily fortified in databases that we can tightly protect. The world's not that simple. We can now API into these and introduce all sorts of very new types of tactics for our threat actors to get at us. And we've got, and we'll just think back to the kinds of things that Michael talked about. And here at the university, we have all these things too. You've got your PCI data, all those credit card transactions, you've got PII data, and incredibly precious information about ourselves and what others might call data exhaust. But really is data we're creating as we step along our digital journeys. HIPAA and high tech. We've got 7 HIPAA covered entities here on the campus, and some of those are serving students directly, serving the communities directly. Some of these are serving research efforts directly. Some of them are doing both as we think about the kinds of COVID testing and COVID shots available on the campus. And that's something that's growing more and more and more for our own ASU community. We're a university, so we have FERPA data, which is very specialized rules around how we actually think about student data. And that student data is intended to protect the reputations and the stewardship of those students. But we've got lots of projects here at ASU where we're really thinking deeply about that in ways of trying to give more of that data directly to students. You can kind of follow some of the work that Timothy Summers has done, and his Innovate project has talked about Pocket and some of our other efforts. It's a whole new and very interesting space for us to be working in. Things like CMMC. So as Sally Morton here, our Executive Vice President for the Knowledge Enterprise, thinks about how do we get the ASU community from close to 700 million in research expenditures and getting that number over $1 billion, which puts us with the world-class research universities across the spaces where we really want to be contributing knowledge. We're not going to make that jump without doing some pretty extraordinary work. A lot of that work will require security environments for our researchers that lead us into things like CMMC. It's a really complicated set of very different kinds of controls, very different kinds of regulation, very different kinds of policies. And if I can invoke Michael again, all of those take some really, really interesting conversations that right inside your project, as a researcher, you might need to communicate to your IRB committee. As a student, you might need to communicate with your faculty about what kinds of things you want to do on a project. As part of the campus, you might be looking at a security review, the oh-so-loved security reviews, where we start thinking about deeply what data is going back and forth with our vendors that we're working with. For students, we've got 170 something different projects. I think in any given semester, there are about 75. If Ruby's here, he can put the number in the chat. Integrations into our learning management system. And those are all passing data back and forth. So the security environment is no longer a beautiful castle that we can collect moats and alligators around, but really a very, very complex ecosystem. And at the end of the day, that means in all sorts of different ways, everyone on this call and probably the 5 of the people that you'll talk to when you leave this session sometime in the rest of your day, all have decisions that directly impact where our security really is now and how we need to be thinking about it in the future. I'm going to shift a little bit and talk, about, and we mentioned this a little bit with Michael, but I do want to talk a little bit about who these bad guys are and in our environment, what kinds of motivations. I think Michael articulated really quickly that the bad guys are humans, and so they have all sorts of different thoughts. And so trying to understand really how do they think about how they're going to approach their own nefarious efforts versus how do we need to think about as cybersecurity or security interested individuals, how do we really need to think about combating them? Got all sorts of different types of folks at play. So you've got threat actors that are really after the intellectual property. Now, those are ones that are going to come very incisively because they recognize, and here at ASU, We've got intellectual property around our research centers. We've got really specialized work that happens across the campus. Biodesign and the COVID data is a really great example for which other threat actors may be more interested in the competitive ability if they were to be able to get access to that intellectual property. That's not the only kind of things that we've got, though. We've also got, as I was saying earlier, a lot of learner data and really incredible analytics on those learners. And frankly, we're getting better and better and better and better at artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to serve our learners and at working in partnerships that do the same thing. So that kind of introduces a whole set of threat actors who might actually be interested in that personal data about our communities, not necessarily the intellectual property, but the personal data about the people that are actually in the ASU ecosystem. Okay, so you have the bad guys that are more pirates and trying to steal the gold. You've got the bad guys that are interested in the individuals and how they might have be able to exploit or have economic interests on the kind of data they could get. You've got disruptors who frankly maybe aren't interested in the IP at all. Maybe they're not interested in the PII data at all. Maybe they're just trying to cause trouble and have things shut down for a while. And that's another very frustrating component of it. Because as we've seen, and especially in the last 18 months, folks that might be doing ransomware, are starting to now not only have a ransom, but on the other side of the ransom, they may have an extortion stage where they actually try to keep the data and have an extortion. So now you've got these different types of bad guys, all of whom may be sharing techniques and sharing practices to think of how they might want to get at us. That's an extraordinary place to be thinking about and what we can be doing to be able to combat pretty complex motives. And with the ransomware guys, I kind of want a show of hands, but I don't know how many that I'll get on the Zoom. It's becoming incredibly sophisticated. You don't even really have to be a hacker to be able to have ransomware as a service and deploy that if you wanted to actually do so. And they're very, 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 very good at being able to shut down an operation and spin it up with a different name. So to Michael's point earlier, our own federal and state and local law enforcement have a really tough time trying to even put our hands under who ransomware actors are. So it's another element of this challenge. You may have a threat and not really even know who the bad guys are or how to go about effectively combating them. One of the things that surprised me about the pandemic, but looking back, maybe it shouldn't have surprised me so much. Ransomware was really hitting small businesses. So we hear a lot, if you're paying attention in education, here locally, our own friends and family getting hit. But and the beef industry and Colonial Oil, so we see things that hit the news. Something that doesn't hit the news, but's really, really important, are all the small businesses that were getting hit. Last summer, there were flurries, blizzards of laundromats that got hit by ransomware. And I promise if you're a laundromat, your cash flow and what's happening inside your laundromat, that's not a huge economy. You don't have a whole lot of economic resilience. So even something like an $8,000 ransom could be devastating to a small family business like that. I think it's really easy to see the bigger things that become news stories and not appreciate how this can actually be very personal and how it can hit inside of our very own neighborhoods and our very own communities in ways that we don't always have insights into. This slide kind of gives you a sense of what the different industries are and how they're ranking in terms of who's being hit. So finance and insurance, that's not too surprising, especially with economically motivated threat actors that they would go after there. No change in rank over time, but look at manufacturing, where we went from 2019 into 2020, and then this data doesn't include all of the supply chain activities that we really started seeing hit at the end of the year and really didn't understand everything that was happening in SolarWinds or Hafnium or Printer Nightmare. Some of these supply chain attacks, we really didn't get a lot of intel in until well into 2021. So it'll be interesting to see, this is resourced or sourced out of IBM. It'll be interesting to see how that particular number shifts and how competitive it is with threat actors going after the finance and insurance sector. The manufacturing sector and how we think about that is very, very challenging. And one of the things that I think is easy to underestimate is even large companies. I was talking to a colleague who's a CISO with a very large healthcare organization that primarily does equipment, medical equipment, and they have a supply chain of all sorts of very much smaller companies that are the ones that they source individual pieces of equipment from. And each of them have their own risk profiles, their own risk challenges. So even if you're the larger conglomerate that pulls all of that together, you're just, the weakest link is always where you might get hit. And so trying to think through how, as we try to navigate this, we could actually be helping out the smaller businesses, whether they're laundromats or small equipment suppliers. It gets really very, there's just plenty of work to do. Energy, Colonial Pipeline will show up certainly on the rankings that we would see for this year. And our threat actors are, on the disruptive side, very, very keen and have a real strong awareness. And frankly, they're great examples. Great isn't maybe the best word. They're really very stark examples across the world of where threat actors have hit energy environments. I won't go through all of these, but education's in the top 10. So it's more and more important for our own environments, for ourselves as practitioners in higher ed, as parents or as neighbors of kids in K through 12. I myself live across the street from elementary schools. Higher education is getting hit really, really hard. And most of the education sector, most of K through 12, don't necessarily have a cybersecurity professional on the campus. Might have one for the district, but they probably don't have that capability on the campus. So as we start thinking about the kinds of things that you will hear all month during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, or if you take our information security training, which of course I know you all will, and you'll take it this month because, well, it's kind of due at the end of the month, but also because it's very helpful in terms of keeping top of mind around all of these things. Education definitely is one of the targets for our bad guys. And some of that stuff is all, are you patching your computers? Are you really thinking thoughtfully about multi-factor? If there was one thing I'd take away, if some company that you're working with, offers you an opportunity to do multi-factor, take it. I know it's an extra click. I know it's an extra step, but it is the single biggest thing that you can do to help prevent any of this threat actor capabilities. And frankly, it's one of the things that we're starting to see greater and greater adoption for. I was just reading this morning that Google's got millions of accounts that it will force multi-factor on, but it really is very, very much worthwhile. Okay, we are at about 10:15. And I think I've kind of given you a little bit of a sense of kind of where we're at. This is an example of the kinds of conversations we're going to have for the rest of the month, and really some fantastic activities on the campus and virtual events. We've got a link that we'll share towards the end of the presentation and that we can put in the chat for you so that you can see more of the kinds of activities that we'll be doing for the month of October. And I might take a minute and say, hey, oh, I like the idea of sitting outside with a laptop.